Brother Jerry Murrell is going to be speaking at this hour on the subject of children are to obey their parents. It's a subject that needs to be addressed. Later on today, we're going to have it addressed from the parents' aspect, but in this hour, more from the children's aspect. He and his wife, Sherry, have 3 children. He preaches for the Oceanside congregation in Jacksonville, Florida. He's been here many times and spoken on our lectureship. He's also spoken at other times here, and we appreciate him a great deal, and so we're going to invite you to listen to him on this important subject now.
Brother Michael mentioned I've been here many times, and that is true, and I am always glad to come back. This command is found in Ephesians chapter 6, where it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and thy mother," which is the first command with promise, "that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long upon the earth." That's the statement upon which this lesson is based. But if you want to go back to the beginning and see where that statement in Ephesians 6 comes from, by way of background, you would go back to the 10 Commandments, to Exodus chapter 20. Because when it said this is the first command with promise, the promise was made back in Exodus chapter 20. There you see the 5th commandment in verse 12. It says, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." When you look at the 10 Commandments, the first of the 10 Commandments have to do with man's relationship with God. Then we discuss man's relationship with his fellow man. Sort of as a transition, as you move into this, you're going to see the first transition verse is going to have to do with the Sabbath day. And you'll find out in the New Testament that that means that man not only has the responsibility to God on the Sabbath, but he also has the responsibility to man on the Sabbath. Then as this transition from God to man's responsibility to God continues, you see God putting man in the home. And that was where it all began back in the Garden of Eden. And you see this statement concerning honor thy father and thy mother. William Barclay said this should be the easiest command in the Bible to obey. There was never a society in which this command was not binding. The man who won't listen to experience will soon end up in trouble. Another fellow said, charity is said to begin at home, but a lot of other things begin at home. Thoughtfulness begins at home. Truthfulness begins at home. Uprightness begins at home. Honesty begins at home. And on and on and on you could go with a list of the things that we learn in the home. Jesus, again, is our perfect example. In Luke chapter 2 and verse 51, we find out that when he went home, he was subject to his parents. Now, have you ever dealt with a young man as a preacher, as a Christian, as an elder, a deacon? Someone has brought him to you for counseling. And when you sit along with him, you find out basically what he believes is the reason he does not have to obey his parents is because really they're hypocrites and he's better than they are, number one. And number two, really, he's a lot smarter than they are. Therefore, he does not have to obey his parents. If you run into that, Luke 2:51 is a good place to go. Because compared to Jesus Christ, I don't want to burst any bubbles about Mary and Joseph, especially if you happen to believe some of these Catholic doctrines about that she never sinned. But let me tell you what, the Bible says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Jesus was more pure than his parents. And secondly, Jesus, being an omniscient being, was also just a little bit smarter than his parents. But guess what? He was still obedient to them because that was his role. Later, when he was about to leave the earth in John 19:26, he turns to the Apostle John and he says, "Behold thy mother, mother, behold thy son." What's he doing? He's going to take care of his mother after he has gone from this world. Now, having children is a scary situation. Scary. Guess what? It is one of the hardest things you will ever do. Because you start out training people at an age that you don't remember anything about. Now, when you get teenagers, you remember a lot of that stuff. But you don't remember anything about, and you start thinking about, what kind of discipline do I use on a 1-week-old? What about a 2-week-old? What about a 3-week-old? At some point, this discipline form is going to change, but when are you going to change it? It is a scary situation. About like the fellow that lived up in Minneapolis back in the days when the fathers would sit in the, not in the delivery room, but in the room over there waiting on the babies to be brought out to them. And this fellow was sitting there, and they came in and they said, "Your wife is the mother of twin boys." And the guy stood up and he said, "That is just amazing because I play for the Minnesota Twins." Then another doctor came in and he says to this other father, he said, "You have triplets. That's the first set of triplets born in this hospital." He said, "That's amazing. I work for 3M. Well, the guy passed out on the floor. When they woke him up, they said, what happened? He said, "I work for 7-Up. That would be a big change, wouldn't it? There's some assumption that in this command, honor thy father and thy mother, that were present in that world that may not be present in our world. That does not mean the commandments does not apply. For example, it assumes that we know who our parents are. Now, the sad point today is a lot of people don't know who their parents are. Secondly, it assumes that we know them well enough to honor and appreciate their role. That we just didn't, when we turned 18, file a Freedom of Information Act and find out who they are. Thirdly, it assumes that we have opportunity to love and honor and respect them. That is, we just weren't raised by our grandparents while our parents went off and did whatever they intended to do. What we're going to talk about today is just 2 simple points. That'll save us on time if we don't make a third one. First of all, the requirement of the command, and secondly, the reasons to keep the command. Let's talk about the requirement first. Honor thy father and thy mother. If you honor them, you will obey them. The word back here in Exodus 20 and verse 12 that's translated honor is the word kabod, which has the idea primarily of being heavy or weighty. We talk about a person, he carries a lot of weight. That's the idea of honor, the way we use it in our society. That means that the parent carries a lot of weight. His word, her word is important. Now, what this command does not require of us, number one, it does not require of us that we think our parents are perfect. If God required that of you, He would be asking too much of you, because guess what? They may not tell you this till you're older, but they're not. They're not. Secondly, it does not even require of us to think that our parents are always right. You can obey and you can think somebody's wrong. Thirdly, it does not require that we have the interests that our parents want us to have. It's about like Dennis the Menace one time. Dennis the Menace, his mother was there, and she told him to go and sit in the corner. And he did not. He went over to the corner, but he would not sit down. So, Dennis the Menace's mother come over, and we can just assume, because they didn't put it in the cartoon, wore him out pretty good. And then Dennis is over there, and he sits down in the chair. And he says, a little thought bubble above his head. This is not one of those that come out of his mouth, I may be sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. Well, sometimes that's just going to have to be the way that it is. There's some things that this command does require of us, though. To respect our parents and to love our parents. Let's talk about honor denied. In the natural course of things, certain things take place. Proverbs 30 and verse 17. The eye that mocketh his father and despiseth his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall eat it. That's pretty graphic if you think about it. But that's how God feels about people who act this way. In fact, in the Old Testament law, in Deuteronomy 21:18 through 21, and Exodus 21 and verse 17, we read that the rebellious child was to be stoned. That indicates to me that in the Old Testament, civil authority was backing up parental authority, not trying to contradict parental authority. It was trying to add to it. Well, what about honor demonstrated? Well, in the home, number one, Children should recognize their role. Now, many of us grew up in the day when children were to be seen, not heard, unless you could holler out when they slapped you for talking, you know. Wasn't it a different world? Now, recognize their role. Now, that may not be in a specific home. That may not be the way the kids are raised anymore. And that might aggravate you if you're a grandparent, okay? But they need to recognize their role, and that role is not the head of the house. Brother John was talking about going to Walmart, and we're just watching. That's a sad thing to do, to go to Walmart, and you see this child throwing a temper tantrum. And then guess what the mother often does? He was throwing a temper tantrum because he wanted I'll just pick an Xbox game. And he throws it, and she decides, I am going to buy you the Xbox game just to make you be quiet. I know I'm a troublemaker. I try to be a peacemaker, but I end up being a troublemaker. I have said to those mothers before, if you do buy him that game, you do know that the next time he wants something, he will do that again. And I had a mother tell me one time, I know, but it's a whole lot better than the alternative. Well, it might be if you're Donald Trump. But in my house, we just can't live that way, okay? There has to be another way. There has to be another way. Secondly, you need, as children, to respect their word. You show your Bible term foolishness when you do not respect the words of your parents. Proverbs 15 and verse 5 says, a fool despiseth his father's instruction, but he that regardeth reproof is prudent. You need to have respect for their word. Listen, they have been through some things that you may not have been through yet. Now, I know the world's always different, supposedly, but a lot of these same things just kind of repeat themselves from generation to generation. Thirdly, not only recognize their role, respect their word, you need to obey their word. Brother Michael Shepard quoted, I think, the whole chapter of Romans, I think. Romans 1:18 through 32 yesterday. And the middle of that list of sins in verse 30 that are so bad and so evil and so wicked, truth breaker and so forth, it says, what does it say about parents? Disobedient to parents. Disobedient to parents. One woman was so exacerbated with her son at the end of the day, she looked at him and she said, Bobby, I want you to do whatever you want to do, and I want to see you disobey me then. You ever been there? After a long day? Well, obedience. That's what children owe their parents. While at home, recognize their role, respect their word, and obey their word. Secondly, after marriage. After marriage. Number one, listen to their advice, but run your own house. Because they're no longer the head of your house. That does not mean that you cease to listen to them. That does not mean that they suddenly become such a bad source of advice. Hearken unto thy father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she is old. Proverbs 23 and verse 22. Secondly, when you're grown up and you have your own house, don't hold their mistakes against them. You have a powerful tool when you grow up and you have children of your own. That tool is called grandchildren. Grandchildren ought to be more than a tool. To manipulate and to say, if you don't do it this way, I won't. Now, I'm not talking about immorality and if you don't get the beer out of your house with my kids there, they're not coming. That all makes sense. But what I'm talking about is you're not going to say this, you're not going to do this around me, you're not going to try to help me because I will just pull those grandchildren away from you. That is not right. Thirdly, you need to, after you're married, apply both the good and the bad from your rearing to raise your children. My great grandpa Murrell was a little short preacher in Tennessee, Tennessee City, Tennessee. He was big buddies with J.D. Tant. I know that might shock some of you that I've got ancestors that hung around with Brother Tant, but they started to start a preacher's retirement center together one time. It fell through on them, but anyway, he spent his whole life going and preaching. And at home was his wife first. She had some problems and wound up in an insane asylum and died there. Then my Aunt Zorita, the oldest of the girls, raised those kids. And great-grandpa Murrell was still out preaching. And he was going, and he was preaching. With this teenage girl raising all of his kids. Well, as a result of that, my grandpa Murrell, his son, never stayed away from home more than 2 nights and hated to be gone more than 1 night from home. Why? Because the result of his child rearing. I'm talking about when he was a grandpa and had nobody at home. He did not spend the night anywhere. Why? Because of the way he was brought up. Many people go around unhappy because their parents were not perfect. And they find a way to blame them for everything in life. But guess what? If your parents were not perfect and you are now an adult, it's your time to make your own choices, and they no longer can affect you unless you allow them to affect you. Thirdly, after your parents are old. We talked about when you're in the home. We talked about after you get married. What do you do after they're old? Number 1, offer them your time. Offer them your time. Old people get lonely. Everybody needs to recognize that people need their time. There was one fellow, he came home from work every day and he was always in such a hurry. Gotta go. He was always in a hurry, and he was trying to, deal with his family, and they would sit down and they would eat kind of hurry up style. Sometimes they wouldn't even sit down. They'd just fill their plates and stand there and eat. And his daughter came in one day. She said, "Daddy, I've got to tell you something, but don't worry, I'll tell you real fast." And his conscience was pricked, and he thought, what am I teaching my daughter here? He said, "Honey, you can tell me, and you don't have to tell me fast. Slow down and tell me." She said, "I'll talk slowly if you'll listen slowly." People need our time. Do you remember, let's go back in time. Do you remember when you were young and maybe your parents didn't have enough time for you for one reason or another? Do you remember how that felt? Maybe you wanted the football thrown around, or maybe you wanted this or that, and you'd been working 18 hours and didn't do it. Do you remember how it felt? Well, let me tell you something. When they're old, they learn and they get on the receiving end of that stuff. But we ought to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, and not treat them the way we were treated. You need, when they are older, to give them some time. Don't be too busy for them just because they might have been a little busy for you. Next, offer them your respect. You should honor your parents even though they no longer are ruling the roost in your home. Thirdly, offer them your care. In fact, notice in Matthew 15 how Jesus talks about honoring parents. In Matthew 15, there were some folks who had their own tradition. Verse 3, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and mother, and he that curseth father and mother, let him die to death. But ye say, Whosoever shall say to his father or mother, It is a gift by whatsoever thou might be profited, and honor not his father and mother, he shall be free. Thus have you made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. Now here's what they were doing. They would have money. They would have money in the bank. And their father and their mother would get old, and in that society, FDR had not yet been born. There wasn't even any Social Security. They had nothing. And they couldn't work because they were too old. There was nothing. There wasn't a lot to save up through the years because there wasn't a lot more than a day's wage, a day's work was about all you had, so they had nothing. And here comes their parents saying, hey, we need some help. Could you help us? Could you feed us? Could you give us a place to stay? And the child would go down to the priest, and he would give a donation. And he would say, Corbin, it's a gift. And after father and mother died, the priest would give the money back, and he'd take his little cut, and all of a sudden he had money again. Jesus said not taking care of your parents is failing to honor them. And he calls this in verses 7 through 9 hypocrisy. He says in verse 7, ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, this people draweth down to me with their lips, with their mouth, and honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. For in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And we use that passage all the time to talk about instrumental music. And I'm not saying it doesn't apply there, but what I do want to say is a lot of people who use that passage against instrumental music then turn around and don't honor their parents when they're old. And that's exactly what he was talking about when he gave the passage. In our world, do you know why euthanasia is such an issue? Because some folks just don't want to be bothered. David's cry of old might be echoed by some parents when he said in Psalm 71 and verse 9, cast me not off in my old age, forsake me not when my strength faileth. See, honor includes helping people when they're in need. Psalm 91 and verse 15. He shall call upon me and I will not answer him, God said. I will be with him, he shall call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in time of trouble. I will deliver him and I will honor him. 1 Timothy 5, another passage, 1 Timothy 5:8, that we apply in a certain way, which it applies there, but it's not the primary meaning. If any provide not for his own, save they of his own house, he's denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now, how do we usually apply the passage? We usually say when you are head of a house, you need to get out and earn a living and take care of your children. Well, that principle's true. But do you know that's not what 1 Timothy 5 verse 8 is talking about? It's talking about when your parents are old, honoring them by making sure that they have enough financially to get by. That's what aggravates me the most when these congressmen and senators start talking about, my mother can't afford her medicine. What? You got more money than me. Why don't you pay for her medicine? Now, I don't mean that society as a whole would be, I'm not talking about that. But that individual congressman standing up there, he's got more money probably than anybody in this room. Except John, he's in insurance now. But all kind of money. And they don't pay nothing. They want me to pay for their parents' medicine. Why? Why? When it's their primary responsibility. Secondly, what are the reasons to keep the command to honor and obey our parents? Number one, there's a good reason. In Ephesians 6 and verse 2, Paul says, for this is right. That ought to be enough. There's right and there's wrong. It's right to obey, it's wrong to disobey. It's right to honor, it's wrong to dishonor. In Colossians 3 and verse 20, Paul gives the same command about obedience to parents, and he says the reason is, it is well-pleasing unto the Lord, indicating to me that that which is right is that which is well-pleasing to the Lord, and that which is well-pleasing to the Lord is that which is right. Now, can you think of a better reason to do something other than it is right? But it doesn't stop there. It results in longer life, that thy days may be long. Man has for long years wanted to live longer. In fact, one of the reasons that Florida is where it is because people were looking for the fountain of youth when they discovered it. And if you go down to old St. Augustine, Florida, you can get some of that water at the fountain of youth. It doesn't taste all that good. But I told my wife when we were there, I said, you know, it doesn't taste good, but if it would actually work, I would probably take some of this stuff and drink it more often. Oh, we got a lady at church. She's not dealing well with her age. She has a few birthdays, a few years older than me. I took her a bottle of that stuff. She did not appreciate it. But if I'd have known it was Sonia's birthday. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, you live longer. Here is a promise attached to this command that says you'll live longer. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, that was absolutely true. I'd live longer if I obeyed my parents. But in our world, it's still true. You know, there are general principles. I told people recently, talking to them, you know, if you live the Christian life in general, your life, there's just so many things that the rest of the world has to tolerate and go along with and reap the benefit, reap the whirlwind from. If you're a Christian, you don't drink alcohol, so you're not going to lose your job because you don't show up at Monday because you were drunk all weekend. If you're a Christian, you may or may not get cancer, but you don't get lung cancer from smoking. My grandfather got it because he pumped gas for a living. All these things. And one of those things, if you listen to your parents, you know, you're listening to someone who has been through it before, and your life is going to be so much easier. Thirdly, not only is it right, not only does it result in longer life, but it retards the growth of society. He says that you may live long upon the land. Now, when you go back to Exodus 20, he's talking about living in the promised land a long time, the land of Palestine. But the principle that underlies it is that nations depend on homes to prosper. And if a nation does not have strong homes, I can promise you this, there's not enough armies to protect them. Because you don't raise up the kind of people who make the sacrifices to defend that nation. You'll have to do like the Romans, who cast their children out to die when they decided they didn't want them. You'll have to go out and hire the Hessians to come in and protect you. And guess what? They're not going to protect you long because they don't have a stake in that country. There's no army that can sustain it. It's from the parent-child relationship that we first learn respect for authority. And if children don't learn respect for authority there, they never will. I went to high school with a fella. Now, I'm not telling you he was all that bright. But he said, I'm quoting him, I'm tired of living with all these rules in my parents' house. I'm going to join the Marines and see the world. And he did join the Marines. I hadn't heard from him since then. For all I know, he's Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. I don't know. But if he didn't learn it somewhere, he wasn't going to learn it. The child that does not learn to respect authority in the home will not respect the authority of the teacher in the classroom. He will then, if he does get a job, not respect the authority of the boss on the job. And when he leaves his job, he will not respect the authority of the policeman on the corner. And when he gets through with him, he might not even respect the authority of the warden. But guess what? When he gets in the pecking order in that prison, Bubba will teach him respect for authority. You will learn it, but it'll be too late. And if you don't learn it then, you will learn it on that final day when the Bible says, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is what? Lord, the glory of God the Father. That is, he's the authority. You will recognize his authority on that day, but it'll be too late. Isn't it so much better to learn respect for authority early? Because if you don't learn in the home, you may think, I know more than they do. Guess what? You may or may not know more than your parents, but I promise you the day's coming where you're going to know a lot more than your boss on the job. And he's going to tell you to do it a certain way, and you may try to explain to him, we can't do it that way, and here's why. Got a friend. He works for the school system, and he fixes electric generators at schools. His boss came to him and said, I noticed that yesterday you went to 2 schools and today you went to 9 schools. Why can't we even that out? That doesn't look good. They're going to audit our records. He said, well, the reason I did that was I always schedule these 2 schools because they have the oldest generators. So I know it's going to take longer to service them, and if I have to get parts, it's going to take longer to get the parts. So I do those together, and then I do the other ones the next day, and I drive back and forth in between, and they're on opposite sides of town. He said, well, they look a whole lot better if you do one of those and 4 of these, and then do one of those and 5 of these. He said, well, I could do that, but I would be wasting a lot of gas. And incidentally, we've got trouble in Duval County with gas right now. The price is a little high. And the school system is trying to cut back on the gas that these fellows use until July. In July, they can use all they want. But it's June now, end of the fiscal year. They can't do that. So he said, I would have to drive all the way across town twice if I do that. He said, well, I just think it would look better because that's hard to explain to my boss. So you know what he did? Just exactly what the guy told him to do. Did it make sense? Not from his perspective. Maybe not even from his boss's perspective. But his boss's boss, all he sees is a printout. And that's all he knows is one day he can do 2 and the other day he does 9. Now, if you cannot learn in the home to salute it and let it go up the flagpole, you will never learn it, and your life will be very, very hard. Those are the kind of things we learn at home. Now, the thing about the home is, most of the time, even though you don't understand, it will turn out to be right. That's one of the hardest things that I have in raising my children. I made a few vows when I was young, many of which I have actually gone by. One that I had to give up was, I remember telling myself, I don't remember how old I was, but I remember repeating it. I will never tell my children because I said so. If there's a good reason, I will explain it to them. Well, that worked until there's some things you can't explain to your children. But let me tell you what. You cannot explain to a 3-year-old girl why she can't wear her dress that short. Now, I hope you can explain it to a 16-year-old. But you cannot do it to a 3-year-old because she does not see the world from your perspective at all. And you just give up because you know there's no way she can. She cannot see it that way. So sometimes you just have to say, because I said so. And over time, it will reach the point that they will realize, that was pretty good advice. But don't think it'll happen when they're 16. At least not with that one. But like somebody said, I think, John, you pay for the clothes. You ought to be able to control what they wear. I'll tell you one, we got a rule in our, I guess I'm getting off on Brother Howe's topic. One of the rules we got in our house, my children have clothes, that they're allowed to wear in the house that they're not allowed to wear anywhere else. And one day, one of my children, Catherine told me I couldn't tell stories about her, so one of my children, who happened to be the oldest, decided she would go out into the neighborhood and play in something that she was not supposed to wear outside the house. When she got back, we had a talk, because I didn't see her till she got back. But she got back, we had a talk. And guess what happened to those clothes? They were thrown away. And I told her, if I can't trust you to wear these clothes like you're supposed to, you will not have access to them anymore. We have not had that problem since. We may have it when I get home. But if we do, then we'll throw that away too. That's what being a parent's about. It's not easy, it's not fun, it's not about a popularity contest. But children are to obey their parents in the Lord. This is right. Honor thy father and thy mother, thy days may be long upon the earth. You will prosper if you will obey your parents. Much greater than if you choose not to. Because guess what? They love you and they're on your side. It may not appear that way from time to time. Parents, as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air said, just don't understand. I know that. But one of these days, you'll see a lot more when you get your own. And you'll look back and you will do like I do. I'll tell you one thing that I have thanked my mother for. And it's unrelated to this honor and obey. I thank my mother that my socks matched. Because I live in a modern household where some of these responsibilities are shared. Outside of raising my kids, I do not have a harder job than getting socks to match. Because there's one here and you cannot find a mate for it, for anything. And especially my colored socks, what is blue and what is black, and I got to look at the toes, see if there's a green stripe. I hate that job. I never had to do that job till I was married. I appreciate that about my mother. You may be here today and you may be a child and you may not even know the things your parents do for you that you should appreciate. You may not even realize how good it is to come in and open the refrigerator and find something in there to drink. When you get out and have to start buying it yourself, you'll find out it doesn't just happen by magic. From time to time, somebody has to go down to the grocery store to get nothing but another drink or two and some orange juice and a little milk. We go through more milk in my house than I believe most cows would. The little things you just don't think about. And when you realize it, then it becomes a lot easier to honor, and not just obey, but to honor your parents. Sit around and come up with some thinking like that sometime. It'll help you. Thank you.